The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Mr. Raskin seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
Well, I was moved by the gentleman's critique of moral and factual and scientific relativism, which struck me as a great description of the conversation we're having in America right now about the 2020 presidential election, which Joe Biden won by more than 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. And still, we have a former president of the United States and a large part of his party, which continued to deny that and claim that he won the election. So I can't think of a better example of precisely the syndrome he's talking about of people denying the existence of an objective reality. But Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the gentlelady from Georgia for introducing this superb legislation. And if she would yield for a question, I just want to ask her this, because I know that there are 19 states, including my state, Maryland, and the District of Columbia that have adopted red flag laws. And I want to know whether they actually do work to save lives. Do we actually have warning in some cases that a person might be prepared to carry out a violent gun attack on other people, either a mass attack or to harm themselves or to harm other people?
Well, thank you so much, Representative Raskin, for those questions. And, you know, to my knowledge, in the 19 states that have enacted red flag laws, no, there have not been any that have been struck down simply because they recognize that the number of homicides and also suicides continue to drop. They decrease because, you know, the safety measures that are being put in place. And actually, we know that in 80%, about nearly 80% of the perpetrators that are actually creating kinds of statements, making statements, are acting with very dangerous behaviors. They're actually kind of letting people know in advance, their families, their loved ones. They're letting people know in advance their intentions to do harm in these mass tragedies. So,
well, I thank the gentlelady very much for both of those points. One point being that in a majority of the cases where someone's going to carry out a mass attack, like the Tree of Life cinema, the Tree of Life synagogue attacks, the attacks in Charleston, South Carolina, El Paso, Newtown, Connecticut, these massacres, there are reasons to believe they've either told people or there are reasons to believe that they will act. And so the red flag laws help to empower family members and other intimate people to come forward to say, we've got a real problem, we've got a danger, and it's working. But you've also pointed out, Ms. McBath, and I appreciate this very much, that with all of the very loose talk about the Second Amendment here, not a single one of these statutes has been struck down, despite the fact that lots of them have been brought to court. And why is that? It's for the reason that the chairman indicated before. And it is precisely the Heller decision, which did reject the militia-based concept of the Second Amendment, said that individuals have a right to weapons for the purposes of self-defense and the purposes of recreation. But of course, said Justice Scalia, they are subject to all kinds of reasonable regulation, the same way that the First Amendment is too. I mean, there are reasonable time, place, manner restrictions for the First Amendment. You can protest outside of the White House, but not at 2:30 in the morning with a loud sound system that's going to make it impossible for people to sleep. That doesn't violate the First Amendment. That's not a regulation that violates the First Amendment. It's consistent with the First Amendment. And these laws have been found to be perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment. So we should stop confusing the public about that. Mr. Ice's point was that the judges are not doctors or psychiatrists, but the statute doesn't refer to mental illness. It doesn't require the diagnosis of a specific mental illness. It simply references the standard of whether a person poses a risk, an imminent risk to themselves or to other people. That's precisely the same standard that governs in the involuntary commitment civil statutes, which our colleagues in the minority are praising with respect to taking people to court and then to involuntary commitment. By the way, those statutes are still very much part of the law, so it's not an either or. If people can be involuntary committed for inspection and interview and diagnosis for several days. Certainly, we have the much lesser right to take away their guns so they don't hurt themselves or other people in the meantime. This is excellent legislation. I want to thank Ms. McBath again for her leadership for this common sense, perfectly constitutional legislation, which has been adopted with great success around the country. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Raskin.